I don't think there's anybody here tonight who would regard yourself as a constitutional scholar, but we do know some about the Constitution, right? And we know some of the important aspects of the Constitution. For instance, if I were to mention the Second Amendment, I know that a lot of you here would be fully aware of the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. We are aware of that. In fact, we value that constitutional privilege. Another of the constitutional amendments that really is important, and I think we recognize it as well. We don't know them all. If I were to name some of them, like, what's the 15th Amendment? I don't know. I probably should know, but I don't. But I know the First Amendment. We know the Second Amendment. We know the First Amendment. The First Amendment is really very important. The First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion, but it also guarantees to us the freedom of speech. And we cherish that. It's very important to us. First Amendment, freedom of speech. There's a downside to that, though. There's a downside to having freedom of speech. We can say anything we want to say. But the downside to that is that sometimes we fail to control our tongues the way we should. We're free to say whatever we want to say, but sometimes we say things that we shouldn't say. And so tonight, for just a few minutes, what I'd like to do with you is look at some biblical instructions about when to keep your mouth shut. When do we need to not be speaking? And the Bible has a good bit to say about that. In the text that Gatlin read for us just a few minutes ago, in James chapter 3, James says if you can control your tongue, you pretty much have got it mastered. You are really a mature spiritual person if you're able to control the tongue. And so we want to talk a little bit about that tonight. Thanks for being here. At the close of this day, we are glad that we have another opportunity to come together to worship God, to study from His Word, to learn things that He would have us to know and do. And it is a great privilege to be able to come together for a second time on the Lord's Day. And we thank you all for making it a priority and for being here tonight. We have visitors tonight, and we're glad for our visitors. We want you to come back just every time you have a chance to be here. We'd be glad for you to be here, and we're open to any questions you have about what we're doing at College View and why. So, when to keep your mouth shut. And we're talking here I told some of them this morning when they asked me what the title for tonight's sermon would be. I'm not talking about that we should keep our mouth shut and not eat so much. Now, some of us need that admonition too. We're not talking about dieting or what we eat tonight. We're talking about what we say. And when should we keep our mouth shut? Let me first of all suggest to you that we need to keep our mouth shut in a time when we're angry, in the heat of anger. Some of us, and I include myself in this, some of us have what I would refer to as a quick temper. It's not too hard to rouse us up in that way. And those of you who are like me can relate to that feeling. Something just hits you and you just sort of feel your blood pressure rising. You sort of feel a flush come over your face. You're angry and it comes on pretty quickly. And it's hard to hold back. When you feel that rush of anger, it's sometimes hard to hold back, but we must. Because almost certainly in the heat of anger, we will say something we shouldn't say. In James chapter 1, verse 19 beginning, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. I think if I was going to rank that progression there in order, I would say, first of all, you got to be quick to hear. Then you got to be slow to anger. And then slow to speak. But they all go together, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about listening when we ought to be listening later in the lesson. But you got to be slow to anger and then allow that to make you slow to speak. Because when we're angry, we very often say things we shouldn't say. Notice, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. The problem with it is when we lash out in anger, we're very often not going to do what God would have us do as His people. So, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Those three quick phrases, that'd be pretty good for a note on the refrigerator door. Sometimes we put notes on the refrigerator door to remind us of important things. That'd be a pretty good reminder. And some of us, like me, need that probably more than others. But quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So definitely keep your mouth shut. In just that first blush of anger, just when it just hits you all at once. Step back from that. Don't speak in the heat of anger. Secondly, Keep your mouth shut when you don't have all the facts. My guess is that every one of us here tonight has had the experience of hearing a report about something or someone, and man, initially it sounds really, really bad. You get this report about something, someone, and it's pretty terrible what you heard, and you're tempted to react to that. You're tempted to react to that initial report. You're tempted to talk about it or say something about it. But then maybe you heard the other side of the story. Oh, wait a minute. There's two sides to this story. And that's a basic truth. There's always two sides to every story. Sometimes there's more than two sides to every story, but there's at least two sides to every story. And if you don't have all the facts, it's a very good thing to keep your mouth shut. Notice in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13, it says, "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him." That's what we're talking about, right? In other words, you're trying to comment on or answer or respond to a situation, and you hadn't even heard all about it. You don't have all the facts, and it says that's folly, that's foolishness. It's actually shameful to act that way, and we need to be really careful about that. Be warned. Because again, in those kinds of situations, it's very tempting to speak right up, even before you've gotten all the facts established. Let me suggest to you that you need to be quiet when your words might offend a weak brother. I think all of us, and I would especially argue in particular those of us who are older and more mature Christians, mature in age at least, if not in our conduct, we must always be aware of weak Christians and in particular young people who might be overhearing what we say. And the possibility is that they might be hurt by it. Maybe they might be led to sin or be tempted to sin because we weren't careful about what we said. And so in instances where our words could offend a weak brother, be very careful about what you say. Most often it's best just to keep your mouth shut so that you don't cause offense. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, you may remember this text. In this text, the Apostle Paul was actually talking about eating meats offered to idols. We remember we've often mentioned that was a huge, big controversy in the first century churches, especially in places like Corinth. Corinth was a pagan city. There were temples to idols there. The sacrifices offered in those pagan temples was then taken. The meat that was left was taken and sold at the common markets. And lots of Christians had a real conscience against eating that meat offered to idols. And so in the context of that, Paul says, through thy knowledge, in other words, the knowledge was, Paul basically says, it's not an issue and you really don't have to worry about it. But he says, if your knowledge of that, if through thy knowledge the weak brother perish for whom Christ died, when you sin so against brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Notice, so if I'm acting in a way that a weak person is offended by what I do, I sin against the brethren. I wound their weak conscience, but notice, I'm also sinning against Christ in the process of that. So this wasn't talking about words. This was talking about conduct in regards to that eating of meats offered to idols. But I think a principle is set forth there. If I wound someone's conscience and I cause them to sin, then I have sinned and I sin against the Lord. You think, have you ever been guilty of that? It's something to be concerned about. So keep your mouth shut if your words might offend a weak brother. Let me suggest don't speak when you're tempted to joke about sin. This sort of expands on the point we were just making. But I'm going to tell you, it is absolutely never appropriate to joke about sin. Sin is an incredibly serious thing. We all know that well. It is, as we would definitely say, no joking matter. And especially, again, in particular, when weak Christians are present who might be offended by what we say. But just overall, it is never fitting to be joking about sin. Notice in Proverbs 14, verse 8 and 9, the foolishness of fools is deceit. Fools mock at sin. So this is the idea we're talking about here, making light of or joking about sin. We should never do that. And so here's an area where we can just absolutely say, I'm just going to make a commitment right here, right now, and I'm just never going to do that. I'm never going to make a joke about sin. My own sins or other people's sins, I'm just not going to joke about sinful things. We ought to be able to make that determination, hard and fast rule, to never joke about sin. I think that sometimes Christians are guilty of that sort of thing, and it's totally wrong and inappropriate. Keep your mouth shut when you would be ashamed of your words later. I can make a very positive confession here. There's been plenty of times in my life when I have looked back with regret on words that I have spoken. Would you join me in that confession, that looking back and getting what we always say, hindsight is 20/20. So I'm looking back, now I see that situation perfectly, and I realize that what I said was wrong. It was hurtful. I'm actually ashamed of what I said. I wished I had never said it. I think that's probably a pretty common feeling that we have. If hindsight is 20/20, what we need in this regard is some good foresight. It'd be good to look ahead and say, now if I say this, what would be the potential outcome or consequence of me saying this now in time to come? If we would just think ahead a little bit, we would be more careful about our words. But keep your mouth shut when you'd be ashamed of what you said. Realize beforehand about the power of your words. In Job chapter 40, we have studied the book of Job not all that terribly long ago, but we remember that patience of Job. Job was a tremendously great person, but he was under an incredible stress and strain, not only from the things that he had personally suffered, but because these so-called friends and counselors came to him and were giving him all kinds of bad advice and falsely accusing him, and they got him right to the edge of saying things toward God that he should not have said. And so God approached him about that, and God rebuked him for that. Job 40, verse 1, moreover the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. So this is God coming back at Job for what some of the things, very close to saying the wrong thing, maybe probably did say the wrong thing, and God rebukes him, and Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile, what shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. I think Job was in that situation where he was ashamed of what he had said and realized it. And he said, I spoke once, but I won't say again. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'll put my hand on my mouth. Job realized this is a good time to keep your mouth shut. And I think that we would do well to feel the same way a lot of times. But hopefully we could avoid already saying things that we're now ashamed that we said. Look ahead and see the outcome of your words. Keep your mouth shut when you would be ashamed of what you might say. Keep your mouth shut if the issue is none of your business. I think this is a really, really big one that a lot of us, and in so much of what I'm saying tonight, I'm including myself absolutely, but I think this is an issue where a lot of us need to pay special attention. This is a really big area of concern. I would argue, I don't know, see if you agree with this analysis or not. I would argue that we are typically way too nosy and we stick our nose in where it doesn't belong. And we need to be careful about that. We need to be careful of intruding into things that are none of our business. In Proverbs 26, verse 17, it says, whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. I've always liked that verse. So what about one who takes a passing dog? A passing dog would be a dog that he's not your own dog, and he's not a dog that you know or he knows you. This is a stranger dog. And so here's this dog just going by. You're going to reach out there and grab him and jerk him by the ears? the result of that is he's almost certainly going to bite you. Right? You're going to pay a price. So one who meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. It will bite you. And again, I would suggest to you that this passage is telling us, mind your own business. Don't be sticking your nose in where it doesn't belong, and certainly keep your mouth shut in such situations. Proverbs 20, verse 3. It is an honor for a man to cease from strife, but notice, but every fool will be meddling. It's a foolish thing to meddle in business not your own and to talk about things that are none of your business. Just keep your mouth shut. We need that admonition, don't we? 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And notice this, and attend to your own business and work with your own hands just as we commanded you. I think a lot of times we need this instruction and encouragement. Just attend to your own business. You know, if we're able to take care of our own business well, we're probably doing real good. We don't need to try to take on other people's business when we haven't even taken care of our own very well. So keep your mouth shut when the issue is none of your business. Here's one that I may have to spend a minute explaining what I mean, but keep your mouth shut when your intention is merely to flatter someone. Have you ever been around a flatterer? I know that you have been, you know. And the flatterer, there's a critical difference between flattering someone versus offering them deserved praise and commendation. Now, get that. I'm saying there's a real difference between flattery, which the Bible speaks badly of, and actually praising someone who deserves to be praised. Typically, flattery is done to get an advantage. So if I, for instance, am flattering someone, I'm usually doing that because I hope to get something out of it rather than give that other person something deserved. Flattery is typically a selfish act on the one who's doing the flattery. That's what we're saying. Look in Psalm 12, verse 1 beginning. Save, O Lord, for the godly one is gone, for the faithful have vanished from among the children of man. Everyone utters lies to his neighbor. With flattering lips and a double heart they speak. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips. Here's an example of how the Bible speaks badly concerning the idea of flattery. Notice, everyone lies to his neighbor with flattering lips and a double heart they speak. And so, all too often, flattery is not even honest or truthful. And it is broadly condemned in the Scripture. And we need to be really careful. We need to keep our mouth shut when our only intention is to flatter someone with the potential idea that I could benefit from sort of, what's the expression we would use? Buttering them up, right? Isn't that what we talk about? Buttering someone up for my own advantage. Now, I want to show you that in the Scripture, there is a notable difference between this false flattery, which I think is very interestingly linked with lies here. There's a real difference between false flattery and true commendation and praise. Go to Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman, the very famous passage about the virtuous woman. Verse 26 beginning. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Do you notice the way this is grammatically laid out? Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Who said that? Her husband also. He praises her, saying, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Well, this was not false flattery on his part. This was deserved praise for the worthy woman, for the virtuous woman. So here, this is commendable, right? We ought to say good things, commendation, praise to people who deserve it. But there's a distinct difference between that and flattery. And so if your intention is just to flatter someone, keep your mouth shut. We should not be doing that. we need to keep our mouth shut when we're tempted to tell an outright lie. I think this is such an obvious one. I almost didn't add it to the list because I think it's so overtly obvious. Definitely don't be telling lies. And if you're tempted to tell a lie, just keep your mouth shut. You know, the statistics tell us that most people lie all the time. Lying is a very common failing among people. A survey I saw taken last year said that the average American lies 4 times every day. Now, I sure hope that, you know, an average means some do less, some do more. The average is 4 lies a day. I hope we're dragging that average down tremendously, because I hope we would be able to say, I don't ever lie. I try never to tell a lie. I can't remember the last time I told 0 lies. So hopefully we're bringing the average down. But lying is a common problem, and the scriptures speak to that, and we need to certainly be on guard. Ephesians 4, verse 25, wherefore put away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor. That's easy enough to understand, isn't it? Put away lying. That should have no part in our conduct. That should be no part of our speech to tell lies. All right. So what do we got there? 8. I got 8 things there for you. Good times to keep your mouth shut. When you're immediately angry, don't have all the facts, could offend a weak brother, tempted to joke about sin, ashamed when you'd be ashamed later of what you said. If the issue is none of your business, when your intention is merely to flatter, when you're tempted to tell an outright lie. And then finally, and this is an important one, keep your mouth shut when it's time to be listening. You know, there is a time to listen. Someone, again, this is so obvious, but someone pointed out, you don't learn anything when you're talking. You learn something when you're listening. And so when it's time to be listening, listen. And I want to take you back again to a passage we looked at earlier. James 1, verse 19. Let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak. Again, you can't do both at the same time, right? So you should be very quick to hear, because you have a strong potential to learn something when you hear. You should be slower to speak, because we always cross the line with our words. Remember, we mentioned in the text that Gatlin read earlier, if you don't offend with your tongue, you really have reached a high level of spiritual maturity, because the tongue is a hard thing to control. So if the tongue is a great danger to me, then I need to be slow about using it. If I can learn something valuable by listening, I need to be quick to hear. It just absolutely makes sense. It's good common sense, if nothing else. In Proverbs 19, verse 20, listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. That's making the same point that we were making, and I think it is certainly worthy of our consideration. So, when to keep your mouth shut. That's the lesson I need. I got to tell you, I can use those biblical instructions, and my guess is that if you would join with me, you'd confess the same thing. That we get ourselves in trouble with our mouth too often, and we can do better. And so the lesson tonight is just a quick little look at controlling maybe the most difficult thing we have to control, our tongues. When to keep your mouth shut. Thanks for listening, and we hope that this has been helpful and encouraging to us all. We're going to sing a song of invitation. Our sermon tonight has not been the kind that teaches the plan of salvation or encourages obedience to the plan of salvation. But we would never want to end an assembly without providing that opportunity. So if there's someone in our assembly tonight that either needs to initially obey the gospel through that simple gospel plan of salvation, hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized for the remission of sins. If you're desirous to do that, we'd be anxious to help you. We'd also be more than ready to study with you if you have questions about that. If you're a Christian already, but you've slipped back and you've not been faithful in serving the Lord, come back in repentance, confession, and prayer. If we can help, let us know while we stand and sing this song.